Hello and welcome back to Hollywood Unveiled, the series where we don't just scratch the surface, we take a deep, sometimes uncomfortable dive into the stories behind the celluloid legends. Today, we're journeying back to the very dawn of Hollywood's golden age, a period of breathtaking innovation, towering ambition, and yes, carefully constructed illusions. And at the epicenter of this nascent dream factory stood a figure whose radiance once outshone nearly all others, yet whose name today, for a surprisingly large number of people, evokes little more than a quizzical frown: NORMA TALMADGE. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the 1920s. The world is roaring, a whirlwind of jazz, liberation, and the flickering magic of the silent screen. In this era, cinema wasn't just entertainment, it was a global phenomenon, a new language spoken in light and shadow. And who was one of its most eloquent, most revered priestesses? NORMA TALMADGE. We're not talking about a fleeting starlet here. We are discussing an empress. For much of that decade, she was consistently one of the top 3 box office attractions in the world. Think about that. Her films grossed millions, a staggering sum at the time. Magazines couldn't get enough of her. Her face, an exquisite canvas for every conceivable human emotion, adorned countless covers. She was the Lady of the Great Indoors, a title that spoke to her dominion over the dramatic interior lives of her characters. She was the undisputed queen of melodrama, a woman whose on-screen tears could and did make millions weep in collective sympathy. Her personal life, her fashion, her very existence were subjects of intense public fascination and adoration. She was, by any measure, a titan. So, here's the puzzle, the central enigma that brings us here today. Why has a name that once stood shoulder to shoulder with the immortal Mary Pickford and the formidable Gloria Swanson faded so considerably from popular memory? How does one of the most successful, most beloved stars of an entire generation become, well, almost a ghost in the grand Hollywood narrative? The quick, easy answer, the one often trotted out in trivia books, is the advent of the talkies. The story goes that her voice, alleged to be a rather unrefined Brooklynese, was a disastrous mismatch for her elegant, suffering-in-silk screen persona. A harsh sound that shattered the silent illusion. And yes, that narrative thread definitely exists, and we'll certainly tug on it. But here at Hollywood Unveiled, we believe that easy answers often obscure more complex truths. Was it solely her vocal cords that precipitated such a dramatic decline? Or are there deeper, perhaps more unsettling, layers to the story of NORMA? TALMADGE's meteoric rise and shockingly abrupt fall from grace? What carefully guarded secrets, what hidden dynamics lay beneath the polished veneer of this silent screen goddess? And perhaps most intriguingly, why, after experiencing a level of fame and adoration most can only dream of, did she choose to effectively erase herself from the public eye, retreating into a profound and lasting silence for the remainder of her life? Today, we're not just recounting a chronological biography, we're setting out to unveil the intricate machinery behind the myth. We'll examine the powerful, often male, hands that sculpted her career, explore the cultural forces that made her a phenomenon, and confront the frequently unseen, often painful price of being Hollywood royalty in its formative and often ruthless years. So, settle in, because we're about to dissect the fascinating, poignant, and ultimately cautionary tale of NORMA TALMADGE, the Forgotten Queen, and the enduring, resonant mystery of her self-imposed silence. This isn't just a story about a star, it's a story about Hollywood itself. The TALMADGE machine, the hand of Joseph Schenck. To truly begin to unravel the NORMA TALMADGE story, we must first introduce a name that is inextricably and powerfully linked to hers: Joseph M. Schenck. Now, to simply call Schenck NORMA's Husband would be a profound understatement, almost a disservice to the sheer scale of his influence. He wasn't just a spouse, he was a mogul in the making, a shrewd, ambitious film executive who would go on to co-found 20th Century Fox. And for Norma Talmadge, from the moment their paths seriously intertwined, he became the chief architect, the master strategist, the power behind her throne. They married in 1916. Norma was already an established actress, having started with Vitagraph Studios as a teenager, but Schenck had grander visions. Almost immediately after their marriage, he orchestrated the formation of the Norma Talmadge Film Corporation. Imagine that. In an era when women, even successful actresses, had very little direct control over their careers or finances, Norma Talmadge had her own production company. On the surface, this was revolutionary. It suggested an unprecedented level of autonomy, creative freedom, and a significantly larger share of the profits. It was a brilliant branding move, positioning Norma not just as talent, but as an entrepreneur, a woman in charge. But let's, as we do here, look a little closer at the mechanics of this independence. Joseph Schenck was the engine room of this corporation. He was the one negotiating distribution deals. He was the one with the overarching financial and strategic vision. He meticulously curated Norma's image, understanding with an almost preternatural instinct what audiences wanted from her. He steered her almost exclusively towards the genre that would define her, melodrama. Those heart-wrenching tales of virtuous women enduring unimaginable suffering, usually with impeccable posture and a single, perfectly glistening tear. Schenck knew this was her sweet spot. He knew it sold tickets. He knew it built a loyal, predominantly female fan base. He wasn't just a behind-the-scenes manager, he was a hands-on producer. He approved scripts, directors, and co-stars. He understood the power of publicity and ensured Norma's name and face were ubiquitous. Her films weren't just movies, they were events. The Norma Talmadge production banner became a seal of quality, a promise of luxurious settings, emotional turmoil, and a star performance that would leave audiences emotionally drained but satisfied. It was an incredibly effective partnership, a symbiotic relationship that propelled both of them to the apex of Hollywood. Film after film, titles like Smilin' Through, Secrets, The Passion Flower, The Lady were colossal hits. Norma became one of the richest women in America, and Schenck solidified his position as a major industry player. He even cannily expanded the Talmadge brand by promoting the careers of Norma's sisters, Constance, who became a celebrated comedic star in her own right, and Natalie, who, not coincidentally, married another Schenck protégé, the legendary Buster Keaton. It was a family empire, with Schenck as its patriarch and Norma as its reigning queen. But every empire has its undercurrents. Was this truly a partnership of equals? Or was Norma the exquisitely talented, beautiful, and ultimately pliable centerpiece of Schenck's grand design? How much genuine artistic input did she have beyond her performance itself? Was she content to be the Queen of Tears, or did she ever yearn for different roles, for grittier material, for comedy perhaps, like her sister Constance? The historical record here is somewhat opaque, filtered as it often is through the publicity machine of the era. There are whispers, hints that Schenck's control was, if not absolute, then certainly pervasive. Some biographers suggest that while he adored and admired Norma, his primary focus was always the business, the bottom line. The Norma Talmadge Film Corporation might have borne her name, but it was Schenck's vision, Schenck's financial acumen, and Schenck's industry connections that were its bedrock. One has to wonder, was it a golden cage, a luxurious prison where she was adored, wealthy and famous, but perhaps not entirely free to define herself as an artist outside the very specific parameters Schenck had established? This isn't to diminish Norma's own talent. Her ability to connect with audiences on a deeply emotional level was undeniable. But the direction of that talent, the packaging of that star, was very much a Schenck enterprise. And this dynamic, this intricate blend of love, business and control becomes absolutely crucial when we consider what happened when the Hollywood landscape began to violently shift. Could the star, so carefully molded by one man's vision, adapt when that vision, and indeed that man's direct influence, began to wane? The cracks in this seemingly perfect facade were beginning to show, even before the earth-shattering arrival of sound. Queen of Tears, decoding melodrama's gripso, Norma Talmadge was crowned the Queen of Melodrama. It was a title she wore throughout her most successful years, a brand that Joseph Schenck expertly cultivated. But what exactly was this potent genre that held such sway over silent film audiences? And why did Norma, above all others, become its most luminous embodiment? Was her reign a testament to profound acting genius, or was she, perhaps, the perfect instrument for a very specific, very popular, and ultimately very formulaic type of storytelling? Let's first try to understand the power of silent melodrama. In a world devoid of spoken dialogue, emotion had to be writ large. Subtlety existed, of course, but the dominant mode, especially in popular cinema, was one of heightened feeling. Melodramas provided this in spades. They dealt with universal themes: love, loss, betrayal, sacrifice, redemption. The moral lines were often clearly drawn. Virtuous heroines, dastardly villains, misunderstandings that led to tragic consequences, and usually a good cathartic cry for the audience. These weren't films designed to make you think critically about societal structures. They were designed to make you feel deeply and intensely. And Norma Talmadge, she was a virtuoso of this emotional language. Her face was astonishingly expressive. She didn't need words to convey a universe of feeling. A slight quiver of the lip, a widening of her expressive eyes, the graceful fall of a tear. These were her tools, and she wielded them with consummate skill. Watch her in films like Secrets 1924, where she ages decades, or the heartbreaking Smiling Through 1922. There's a sincerity, a profound conviction in her portrayals of suffering women that transcended the often convoluted plots. She wasn't just a weeper. There was a dignity, a refined quality to her sorrow that resonated powerfully, especially with female audiences. Why women specifically? Well, consider the era. The 1910s and 1920s were a time of significant social change, but many women still found themselves constrained by societal expectations, limited opportunities, and patriarchal structures. The heroines Norma often played women enduring hardship for their children, sacrificing their own happiness for love, battling against societal judgment. These characters, while often idealized, spoke to the lived, or at least perceived, realities of many women. Norma's characters usually suffered beautifully, immaculately coiffed and gowned even in their darkest hours. This wasn't realism, it was aspirational suffering. It provided a form of escapism, yes, but also a kind of validation. If Norma Talmadge could endure such trials with such grace, perhaps they could too. Her on-screen tears were, in a way, a collective release for the unspoken sorrows of her audience. But here, as always, we must look beneath the surface. This successful formula, honed by Schenck and perfected by Norma, was also inherently a repetitive one. The Talmadge picture became a known quantity. Audiences knew they were going to get lavish production values, a story of romantic or maternal anguish, and a star performance guaranteed to tug at the heartstrings. This consistency was key to her enduring popularity, but did it also stifle artistic growth? Did the Queen of Tears become a prisoner of her own tear-stained crown, unable or perhaps unwilling to venture far from the genre that had made her a superstar? While her sister Constance was delighting audiences with her effervescent, comedic talent, Norma remained largely confined to the opulent drawing rooms and tragic boudoirs of melodrama. Were there no desires to explore other facets of human experience, or was the financial success of the existing formula simply too great to risk? It's a classic Hollywood dilemma, artistic exploration versus commercial imperative. For the Schenck TALMADGE enterprise, the commercial imperative almost always won out. It's easy in our more cynical postmodern age to dismiss melodrama as overly sentimental, even kitschy. But to do so is to misunderstand its power and its cultural significance in the silent era. Norma Talmadge wasn't just an actress playing sad parts. She was a cultural icon who tapped into and perhaps even helped shape the emotional zeitgeist of her time. Her reign was built on a very specific kind of silent visual storytelling. The crucial question then was what would happen to this queen and her tear-soaked kingdom when the very silence that defined it was irrevocably shattered. The answer, as we'll see, was as dramatic as any of her on-screen tragedies. Beyond the halo, forbidden love, and the cost of freedom, while Norma Talmadge was the epitome of dignified suffering and virtuous womanhood on the silver screen, the narrative of her private life, like that of so many Hollywood luminaries, was beginning to diverge quite dramatically from her public persona. And in the late 1920s, a period of immense professional pressure with the looming shadow of sound, a deeply personal drama began to unfold that would have profound and lasting consequences. Her passionate and very public affair with the dashing young actor Gilbert Roland. Roland was everything Joseph Schenck was not, at least on the surface. He was younger, exotically handsome, and represented a more romantic, perhaps less calculated allure. Their affair, which began while Norma was still very much married to Schenck, quickly became the talk of Hollywood. In an industry built on illusion, the reality of one of its biggest stars engaging in such a scandalous liaison was potent gossip. This wasn't just a fleeting dalliance, it was a serious relationship that ultimately led to Norma's separation from Joseph Schenck in 1927, although their official divorce wouldn't be finalized until 1934. Now, from our unveiled perspective, this affair and the subsequent marital breakdown are far more than just celebrity melodrama. What did this signify for Norma, both personally and professionally? Was this a desperate bid for personal happiness, an attempt to break free from what might have felt like the increasingly confining, business-oriented relationship with Schenck? Was she seeking a different kind of partnership? One perhaps more rooted in romantic passion than in career strategy? Or was it, as some have speculated, also a subtle power play, a declaration of independence from the man who had so thoroughly managed her life and career? The timing, however, could not have been more precarious. This intense personal upheaval was occurring precisely as Hollywood was teetering on the brink of its most significant technological revolution, the arrival of sound. Joseph Schenck, for all his control, had been the unwavering bedrock of her career. He was the one who understood the Norma Talmadge brand implicitly, who had navigated the complexities of the industry on her behalf. To separate from him, not just as a husband, but as her primary guide and protector in the shark-infested waters of Hollywood, was a monumental risk, especially at such a critical juncture. Consider the cost of freedom. While Hollywood was, even then, a place of shifting moral codes, the public image of a star like Norma Talmadge, the queen of melodrama, the symbol of virtuous suffering, was a commodity, carefully curated and fiercely protected. An open affair, And a messy separation from a powerful industry figure like Schenck could, and likely did, tarnish that pristine image in the eyes of a public that still held on to certain ideals about its stars. More pragmatically, did this personal turmoil divert her focus and energy at a time when she desperately needed to concentrate on the immense challenge of transitioning to talkies? Furthermore, while Schenck continued to produce some of her films, even after their separation, the dynamic had irrevocably changed. Was he as invested in her success as he once was? Was he as motivated to find the perfect vehicles for her in the new sound era? Or were his attentions and his considerable resources beginning to shift elsewhere as he saw the writing on the wall for some silent stars? Perhaps even his estranged wife. The film industry is, at its heart, a business. Personal relationships, however deep, often take a back seat to commercial realities. The affair with Gilbert Rowland may have offered Norma a taste of personal liberation, a passionate escape. But it also coincided with the erosion of her most crucial professional alliance. She was, in a sense, navigating the treacherous rapids of the sound revolution without her most experienced and powerful captain. The emotional toll, the public scrutiny, and the potential cooling of Schenck's professional ardor, all these factors converged to create a perfect storm. It was a complex interplay of personal desire, professional consequence, and extraordinarily bad timing. As Norma Talmadge stood on the precipice of sound, she was also standing on the shifting sands of her personal life, and the ground beneath her feet was becoming alarmingly unstable. When the voice became a curse, unveiling the talkie disaster, and so we arrive at the pivotal moment, the chapter most frequently cited in the legend of Norma Talmadge's decline, the coming of sound and the so-called talkie disaster. The popular narrative is almost cartoonishly simple. The elegant, ethereal, silent queen opens her mouth to speak, and out comes, well, a voice that allegedly shattered the illusion. A common Brooklyn accent, they said, so at odds with her aristocratic, on-screen persona that audiences recoiled and her career imploded. End of story. Simple, tragic, and a little bit salacious. But as you know by now, we at Hollywood Unveiled are rarely satisfied with the simple version. Was it truly just her accent? Or is that a convenient, almost mythic scapegoat for a far more complex confluence of factors? Let's peel back the layers of this disaster. Her first all-talking picture was New York Nights, released in 1929, produced by Schenck. And the reception was, to put it mildly, not what they'd hoped for. Critics were lukewarm at best, and audiences seemed perplexed. The infamous line often attributed to her from this film, something like, "Get away from me, you Nanook of the North, and get your own husky," whether accurately quoted or an embellished piece of Hollywood lore, became symbolic of the perceived incongruity. It was supposedly delivered in a flat, nasal, undeniably New York-inflected tone that audiences found jarring, even comical, when emanating from the refined Norma Talmadge they knew and loved. But let's widen the lens. Firstly, the technology itself was in its infancy. Early sound recording was notoriously primitive. Microphones were often unwieldy, stationary, and had to be cleverly hidden on set, in flower arrangements behind furniture, forcing actors into awkward, static positions to deliver their lines. The sound quality itself could be tinny, harsh, and unforgiving. Many silent stars accustomed to the freedom of purely physical expression found these technical constraints incredibly challenging. Norma, whose art was so rooted in visual nuance, likely struggled with this new, more rigid form of performance. Secondly, there's the acting style. Silent film acting, especially in melodrama, often relied on broader gestures, more pronounced facial expressions to convey emotion across the language barrier of silence. This style, when combined with spoken dialogue, could suddenly appear stilted, overly theatrical, or simply hammy. The subtlety required for naturalistic dialogue in the talkies was a new skill set, one that not all silent veterans could or wanted to master. Thirdly, what about the choice of material? New York. Nights was a rather gritty underworld drama. Was this the ideal vehicle to introduce the queen of melodrama to the speaking screen? While Schenck was still her producer, one has to wonder if the same meticulous care that went into crafting her silent hits was applied here, or was it a somewhat rushed, perhaps even ill-conceived attempt to jump on the talkie bandwagon? Were they trying to reinvent her too drastically, too quickly? Fourth, we cannot underestimate the psychological impact on the stars themselves. Imagine being Norma Talmadge, adored, celebrated, incredibly wealthy, a queen in her domain for over a decade, all based on a talent that had nothing to do with her speaking voice. Then almost overnight, that unspoken attribute becomes the primary determinant of her future success. Reports from the time suggest Norma herself was deeply insecure about her voice, well aware that it didn't match the ethereal image projected. On screen, she reportedly resisted the transition to sound, and her performances in her talkies sometimes betray a tentativeness, a lack of her old confidence. Fifth, there's the public and critical reaction. Audiences had spent years constructing their own idealized vocal personas for their silent idols. When the reality didn't match the fantasy, the disappointment could be swift and brutal. Critics, too, perhaps sensing a shift in the Hollywood power dynamic, could be merciless. The fall of a great star, then as now, often makes for more compelling copy than their continued success. There might have even been an element of, dare I say, schadenfreude, a certain glee in seeing the mighty brought down by something as seemingly mundane as a regional accent. Norma made one more significant attempt at a talking picture, Du Barry, Woman of Passion, in 1930. It was a lavish historical costume drama, perhaps an attempt to recapture some of her former grandeur. But it, too, failed to reignite her career. The magic, it seemed, had dissipated with the silence. And then, after just these two major forays into sound, Norma Talmadge did something quite remarkable. She retired. At the age of 36, still relatively young, still beautiful, still incredibly wealthy, she walked away from Hollywood. There's a quote often attributed to her around this time that is incredibly telling, whether she uttered it verbatim or not. "I am not Garbo. I am not an actress. I was a personality of the screen. I was a Talmadge." Think about that. "I am not an actress." This from one of the most successful performers of her generation. Was it a moment of painful self-realization, a bitter acknowledgement of her perceived limitations in the new era? Or was it perhaps a shrewdly crafted public statement, a way of preempting further failure, of defining her own exit narrative? It suggests a complex understanding of her own stardom, that it was perhaps a specific alchemy of image, era, and audience expectation, an alchemy that sound had fundamentally altered. So yes, her voice was undoubtedly a factor in her talkie struggles. But to reduce her decline to just that is to miss the far richer, more complex tapestry of technological limitations, shifting industry dynamics, questionable artistic choices, immense psychological pressure, and the fickle nature of fame. The talkie disaster for Norma Talmadge wasn't a single isolated event. It was the culmination of multiple forces, a perfect storm that effectively ended one of Hollywood's most luminous silent careers. And what followed was a silence of an entirely different kind, a silence she herself chose. The shadow in the broken mirror. So, after this journey through the dazzling highs and precipitous lows of Norma Talmadge's career, what lasting image emerges? How do we ultimately interpret the story of this once reigning queen who chose to abdicate? her throne rather than fight a losing battle in a changed kingdom? Is she a tragic victim of technological progress and shifting tastes? A casualty of an image so perfectly crafted it couldn't withstand the harsh glare of a new reality? Or is there perhaps a more empowering reading of her final act? What we've sought to unveil today is that Norma Talmadge's narrative is a rich, multi-layered saga, far more complex than the simple, silent star undone by Talkie's trope. Her ascent was a masterclass in star-building, orchestrated with brilliant precision by Joseph Schenck, a testament to the raw power of the nascent studio system to create and market global icons. She was, in many ways, the perfect product for her time, beautiful, expressive, and embodying a type of idealized feminine suffering that resonated deeply in the silent era. Her reign as the Queen of Tears was no accident. It was a carefully managed phenomenon, but that very perfection, that specific tailoring to the demands of silent melodrama, also contained the seeds of her vulnerability. The transition to sound wasn't just about adding dialogue. It was a fundamental paradigm shift in what constituted cinematic performance, and indeed, stardom itself. The machinery that had so effectively lifted Norma to the zenith of Hollywood proved unable, or perhaps unwilling, to fully retool itself to carry her into this new vocal landscape, particularly as her crucial partnership with Schenck fractured under personal pressures. But here's where Norma Talmadge's story takes a turn that elevates it beyond simple tragedy. After the critical and commercial disappointments of her talking pictures, she didn't linger. She didn't desperately chase fading glory, taking on smaller roles or trying to reinvent herself endlessly. She made a conscious, decisive choice. She retired. Wealthy, still relatively young, she effectively vanished from the Hollywood scene she had once dominated. She married again to comedian George Jessel, a union that lasted for several years, and then later found a long and reportedly contented marriage with Dr. Carvel James, living a life of quiet, affluent privacy until her death on Christmas Eve, 1957, at the age of 63. In this act of withdrawal, there's a profound, if melancholic, power. After a career where so much of her public image, her roles, and arguably her creative direction were shaped by others, primarily Schenck, her decision to retreat can be seen as a final, definitive act of self-determination. She chose silence, but this time it was a silence entirely on her own terms. She refused to become a diminished version of her former self, a poignant relic of a bygone era, endlessly compared to the luminous ghost of her silent stardom. She chose to preserve that legend, perhaps, by simply walking away from the stage. Norma Talmadge's legacy, then, is not just about the films she made, many of which are sadly difficult to see today. It's a powerful Hollywood cautionary tale, a vivid illustration of the dizzying heights and terrifying fragility of fame, particularly for women in an industry that has always prized youth and novelty, often at the expense of lasting artistic careers. Her story is a profound lesson in the relentless nature of change, the necessity of adaptatio, and the potential suffocation of being too perfectly branded or packaged. She remains a somewhat enigmatic figure, the queen of melodrama, who ultimately chose a life devoid of public drama. Her films captured the emotional landscape of an era, and her career trajectory reflects the seismic shifts that transformed Hollywood forever. Perhaps the greatest unveiling in her story is the realization that even at the peak of fame, true agency can be elusive, and sometimes the most courageous act is knowing when to say, enough. What are your thoughts on Norma Talmadge? Was her retreat an act of defeat or one of quiet strength? Her story certainly challenges us to look beyond the simplistic narratives often spun about Hollywood's past. Thank you for joining us on Hollywood Unveiled. We hope this exploration has given you a new perspective on a star who deserves to be remembered for more than just a failed transition to sound. Share your opinions in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. And if you're fascinated by the hidden histories, the forgotten figures, and the complex truths behind the Tinseltown facade, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives. Until next time, keep questioning the official story.